So now, after belaboring the point with rights and setting up Jefferson's core argument in the Declaration of Independence, we now get to the simple conclusion of what the nature and purpose of government is. What is government supposed to be? What is government supposed to do? What is the end for which it was created, or the goal for which it was created? Jefferson explains this. That's to secure these rights, the unalienable rights mentioned, the negative rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness / property. This is why governments exist, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Okay. Now, if you understand his view of rights and you understand his view of natural law, that all men are created equal, and I mean humankind by that, what he is referring to here, it's very easy to take the next step and intuit if government is not meant to harm your rights, not meant to do criminal activity on a larger scale under the veil of authority, what is government to do? Well, government is to protect those rights, to secure those rights. And so this is why Jefferson says governments are instituted among men. Governments are incredible risk because you have human beings with potential to make mistakes, even if they are well-meaning, and harm others. And also you have potential for corruption and harming others on purpose for some other goal. And so with regard to that, governments are supposed to be defensive. They are supposed to defend these rights. And that's the sphere of what the civil authority is supposed to do. So he says government is to protect those rights, life, liberty, property, pursuit of happiness, according to Jefferson, not violate them. So if a government, just like an individual, starts to harm or violate rights, it is engaged, and I mean of a peaceful person, it has engaged in criminal activity. It has now become not a sphere of legitimate civil government, but has become a criminal gang to force its will on others by the use of force. And he says just government comes by the power of consent. Now, Locke argued this as well, and there's some inconsistencies here with how this consent is gotten, what it means to consent. Do we mean the consent of all people literally, or do we mean the majority of people, or just the majority of people who vote, or even the people who vote, even the people who vote no for something but lose? They didn't consent, but they consented to the process. So you can look at my videos on the critique of consent and see that there are some problems with that logically. However, this is what Jefferson is arguing, that the people must give authority and legitimacy to this government because you have humans ruling over other humans. So any government of that kind must be voluntary unless there's a commission of a crime. Of course, people don't have the law forced voluntarily upon them if they're raping and murdering someone, but they've forfeited rights by committing that crime. And then it's consent of the governed, those who are under the government's power, control in this territorial region. Now, Jefferson's argument, again, is very easy to intuit. What is the logical consequence? What happens when government does not have consent anymore? Or instead of protecting rights, it joins in the violation of those rights, or it spearheads the violation of the rights. Governments can murder, kidnap, steal as well. When governments start to do that at the expense of the rights of peaceful people who themselves have not committed any sort of violent crime, what is the right of the people to do? Jefferson argues they can defend themselves. He argues they have a right to alter or abolish. And there's one step to the next. It's not a revolutionary idea of just continually overthrowing government. However, he does not rule that out as a possibility. He says that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, when governments start to destroy the things that they were intended to protect, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, he argues that it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute new government. Meaning you can try to change it through voting, you could run for political office, you can campaign, you can protest, all this stuff, and you're not allowed to harm others in those activities by any means. But he argues that governments can also be abolished, that they can be changed to the point where they are something totally new entirely. Now, this still has limits, that once the new government is instituted, it does not have new powers to start violating rights, or it does not have legitimacy without the consent of the people, according to Jefferson. But he argues that when the government does not protect rights but violates them, the people have a right, the people may alter, change, or abolish, remove, and replace it. It's a fairly radical philosophy of government that brings the government down to a level of strict accountability. Doesn't mean it's always successful. And this is very different from the ideas of the US Constitution. The Constitution kind of goes in a different direction. Jefferson's philosophy and the philosophy of the American Revolution is far more radical, far more jealous over individual liberty and the possibility of the fact that governments may intrude on those things. So this is why Jefferson was suspicious of a national government over the states and over the state governments themselves. Recognized the potential for harm and wanted the power to be dispersed. And so his argument was a right for independence. That because this was the situation, he argued, with Great Britain, the American colonies, now calling them states, independent political entities, can declare secession. They can declare separation. They can declare independence. Whether the government recognizes their legal right to do that or not, he says it is the right of free people to exit. He says that these colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. This was a declaration of separation from this government. And the government did not recognize it and say, oh, you made a good legal argument there and a good philosophical argument about your rights and how that draws to this inevitable conclusion that you are allowed to do this. No, the government of Great Britain was going to fight a war to not let this happen. They did not believe this was legal. They believed this was treason. However, Jefferson argues it's not treason. It's the right of free people to exit government and to form a new government over their own territorial region. And if that government does the same thing, they can do it again. They can alter or abolish. So they notice, though, the word state in both of these, but I'll say the Declaration announces a separation but does not form a government. That's important to know, because a lot of people think this was the founding of America, and it was in the sense that there was something new happening here. However, this does not lay out a plan for government. The 13 states have their own individual plans and expectations for governments. They would figure it out on their own. Now, they may unite in friendship, in fighting together, in common defense, that type of thing, but there's no one government over them all. And I've had people say, well, if there's no one government over them all, they might fight each other. And that's true. However, remember that when there was one government, the United States government over the United States, we had a civil war. The states did end up fighting each other. The federal government made war against the states, and the other states joined in on that. And as you know, southern states tried to exit, right, using the Declaration of Independence. So that a civil war can happen when there's a large federal government keeping states together just as much as they can being independent. So the Declaration announces a separation, does not form a government. That's one of the things people misunderstand. It's a myth of the Declaration of Independence. They are called free and independent states. Notice that each of the 13 states is its own political government. It's like Spain. It's like France. Virginia is not just a division of the United States. Virginia was like Germany or Spain or France or Great Britain. Great Britain itself is called a state. A state means the government of a political entity over a territorial region. So it is not, think about it like this, maybe it's easier to use the word country, even though this isn't totally accurate. 13 different countries, not one nation under God, indivisible, like the Pledge of Allegiance says. That's not what was going on with the states. A state is an independent government. There were 13 of them, not a new nation. And the states, as Jefferson lays out at the end of the Declaration, have these rights. These powers of the states can levy war, they can conclude peace, make alliances, establish commerce and trade. All these things are things that only independent sovereign governments can do. And there's a reason the United States was often called the United States where the U was not capitalized. The United States would later become the name of the US government that was formed. It didn't exist at this time. However, they were just talking about here that they were states that were united. There was no United States government, capital U, capital S. There was the United States, capital S, where the states were the main focus, and they happened to be united. The states were not united as one nation with one government over them, but as 13 states, independent governments, holding this idea of a right of peaceful separation, though that would be defended if not allowed to happen. And this is what leads into the American Revolution.